I just want to insert my opinion for like 2 seconds on the Nolan Wells case, because I just saw where Nancy Grace came out with the transcribed CTO call. And here's my thing. I'm from the South, so I feel like I can speak on this because I grew up around nothing but racist, okay? And so as someone with this skin, I feel like I could speak out on this. Here's my questions. Why? First of all, so many of y'all want to say that it wasn't murder. Like, so many of y'all were so quick to say it wasn't murder, that things happened. If that was the case, then why do none of the friends know what happened? Furthermore, Nancy Grace just released a CTO call. Anybody in their right mind, if you hear what was on that call in the background where they're asking, is someone dead? First things first, you're not going to call CTO. You're going to call 911, typically, if you're worried about someone. Secondly, why did you turn down Coast Guard when they asked if you needed the Coast Guard? If you are sinking, and if there is that shit going on in the background, like what they're asking about, is someone dead, you should say yes to any bit of help that you can get, right? I also think it's odd that all of them got rid of their social media. None of them have really had much of an explanation. They do what your typical white people do in those circumstances. Look at the Murdaugh case, and there was no one of color in that case. But because they were prominent Caucasians surrounding around that death of the girlfriend, they did everything they could to cover up and get him out of it. The same rules apply to this, and like in my head, the same rules apply to this. They were both situations were boating, and in those situations, someone unfortunately lost their life. But getting back to the Nolan case, hearing that voice, like hearing that recording of them asking for, or just asking if someone is dead in the background. How is it that you're clueless and you have no idea what could have happened to him? That call.
Not only has the timeline been analyzed by the Cajun Navy, the U.S. Cajun Navy, based on all sorts of statistical data, new photos are emerging. Take a look at this photo before we go to the Cajun Navy. Look at this. Check out what you're seeing. Look at all the boats surrounding where Nolan was. Leave up the photo out. There's boat number 1. There's boat X. There's boat number 2. There's boat number 3. And there's a boat from which the photo is taken. Now, look in the water. There much has been made. Nolan Wells was drinking. Okay, well, apparently everybody was. They all have containers, open containers in the water. Okay, as far as I know, that's not a felony. Boat number 1, full of people. Boat X, full of people. Boat number 2, full of people. Boat number 3, full of people. People on the boat from which the photo was taken. Some of these boats tied together. You know what that means in my world, Caitlin Becker, joining us in the New York Post? Let me see, Caitlin, please. That means witnesses. See, when I look at that, I see witnesses. Other people say, hey, there's people having a good time. I see witnesses. Do you see all those people?
And a lot of them.
Who were they? Have they been spoken to? Have they been polygraphed? What can they tell me?
Let me tell you something. This case just got a whole lot more interesting. And I mean that in the most serious way possible. Because for weeks now, we've been swimming in theories, we've been debating timelines, and we've been trying to piece together what actually happened to Nolan Wells on that island. And today, we finally have something real to dig into, something documented, something that goes beyond speculation and actually puts concrete information on the table. The United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search team that was out on Horn Island within hours of Nolan going missing, they have now released their complete investigative report. And what they found? It changes the conversation in a major way. Now, I want to be really clear up front. This is not the sheriff's office investigation. This is not the official state findings. But here's the question that keeps coming up. Will law enforcement use any of this? Will they lean on it at any point during the official process? Because what this report contains is genuinely significant. We are talking about new photographs that haven't been seen publicly before, showing how investigators believe the boats were actually positioned that day. We are talking about new witness statements that help fill in parts of the timeline that have been murky and contested since the very beginning. And then there is this gap, this critical, maddening gap of just over an hour that nobody has been able to fully account for yet. And that window, that one specific window of time, could hold the key to everything we've been trying to understand about what happened to Nolan Wells. We are going to break all of that down today, every single piece of it. But there is more, because so much has happened in just the last 24 hours in this case that we have to cover all of it before we are done. And hey, real quick, if this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss an update on this case or any other story we cover. Drop a like on this video because it genuinely helps more people find this content, and I want to know where you are watching from. So drop your city or your country in the comments below. We have got viewers all over the world following this case, and I love seeing where you all are coming from. Now let's get into it. So here is where things stand right now. The United Cajun Navy has put out what is probably the most detailed, independent look at the events of that 4th of July on Horn Island that we have seen from any outside organization. And the findings are pulling back layers on a timeline that has been disputed, questioned, and picked apart from every angle since this whole thing started. Let's start with the photographs, because these photos are something. The report includes an image showing 3 boats anchored side by side. You have got the Palm Beach. You have got the Triton, which is the vessel that Nolan is believed to have arrived on, and then there is a third boat, simply labeled as boat number 3 in the report. Now, before you run with that, the report itself is careful to note that these labels are just source annotations. They are not actual official registration identifications for those vessels. So there is a layer of uncertainty built right into the labeling, but the visual evidence of those 3 boats together is meaningful when you start thinking about the timeline and who was where and when on that island. The report also includes a statement from an independent witness, a woman who actually snapped a photograph of those same 3 boats, and here is what she said. When her group left the island at 7:30 in the evening, Nolan was, and I am quoting directly here, nowhere in sight. That is a significant data point. We will come back to that in a moment, because it reshapes the window we have been working with in a pretty dramatic way. But there is also that distress call. You remember the audio, the one where these young people are calling in saying the boat is taking on water and they are sinking. That call has been at the center of so much debate, because it has been part of the reason the friends gave for leaving the island without Nolan. The story that has been out there is that the boat was taking on water and they had to go. Nolan apparently chose to stay behind, possibly to speak with a girl on the island. And that audio, once it got out, people online started claiming they could hear things in the background. Voices, panic, names being called out. But none of that has been officially verified by law enforcement. None of it. And here is the part of all this that really matters. According to this United Cajun Navy report, their investigators could not find any evidence whatsoever to establish when that boat actually began taking on water. Think about that for a second. The timeline around the boat sinking is absolutely central to understanding why the friends left when they did. And right now, based on this independent review, there is no confirmed evidence pinning down when that water actually started coming in. That is not a small thing. That is a foundational piece of the story that remains unverified. Now, to help make sense of all of this, forensic diver and marine law enforcement expert Alex Spear, someone who has investigated cases just like this one, weighed in on the details of this report. And his perspective is really helpful in cutting through some of the noise around what these findings actually mean. When it comes to those 3 boats and figuring out who was on what, Alex made a really important point. He explained that there is no manifest, no passenger list, no official record of who boarded which vessel that day. So establishing who was on each boat comes down entirely to witness testimony. People saying, yes, I had these specific people on my boat, and this is who came out with us, and this is who left with us. And that, as Alex explained it, all has to come through the investigation itself. Investigators have to go person by person, statement by statement, and build the picture from the ground up. And here is where the boat movements visible in the photographs start to matter. The report shows what appears to be a vessel they are calling Boat X, anchored between 2 other boats in one photograph, and then that same vessel is simply gone in a later photo. Alex explained that what investigators are trying to do with images like these is establish a rough working timeline. If a boat that was clearly present in one photo has disappeared from the next, that tells you something important. It tells you that boat left at some point between those 2 moments being captured. and that feeds directly into the broader picture of who was where and at what time on that island. But Alex was also very direct about the limitations of working from photographs, and this is something I think everyone following this case online really needs to hear. He made the point that unlike what we see on television, you cannot just pull up a grainy photo, hit enhance, and suddenly have a crystal clear image that solves the puzzle. Most agencies simply do not have that kind of technology. The reality of image analysis in a real investigation is far slower, far more painstaking, and far less cinematic than we have all been trained to expect from years of crime dramas. Investigators are asking themselves, is that the same boat? Is that him in that image? And working through those questions honestly takes time. It takes patience. It cannot be rushed without risking getting it wrong. Now here is where the timeline gets very specific, and this is the part I really need you to pay close attention to because it matters enormously to where this case is heading. The report includes a shoreline photograph that is believed to have been taken at 4:50 in the afternoon. That is 19 minutes after the Triton apparently departed at 4:31. And in that photograph, the vessel identified as boat number 2 is no longer in its original position. So by 4:50, at least one boat had already moved from where it had been anchored, and the report notes that Nolan could potentially be visible somewhere in that 4:50 photograph. Not confirmed, not definitive by any means, but the possibility is there. And this is significant because we have heard so much reporting that the last confirmed sighting of Nolan was somewhere around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If he potentially appears in a photo taken nearly 2 hours after that, it changes what we thought we knew about the timeline in a pretty meaningful way. Alex was thoughtful about this point. He was careful to emphasize that a lot of the reporting around this timeline is still actively developing. None of it has been locked in as definitively confirmed. What investigators are doing is sifting through photographs submitted by members of the public who happened to be on that island that day, people who had no idea at the time that those casual holiday snapshots would ever become evidence in a serious investigation. And they are trying to construct something reliable and concrete from what is essentially a scattered, incomplete, unorganized collection of digital images. And that brings us to the core problem that this United Cajun Navy report actually identifies. According to their findings, the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan Wells occurred somewhere between 3:23 and 4:27 in the afternoon. That is a window of just over an hour where the trail, at least as far as what has been independently verified and documented, goes cold. No confirmed witnesses, no confirmed visual evidence, just an open, unresolved gap sitting right in the middle of the timeline. Alex was honest and measured about this when he addressed it. He said, think about any large gathering, any event with a crowd of people, and imagine someone asking you to account for exactly where one specific individual was during a particular hour when you were not specifically watching that person. You are going to struggle to do that accurately. Time moves differently at events like that. Nobody is tracking minutes unless they have somewhere to be. You have got a lot of young people on a holiday weekend on a barrier island, enjoying the day, and they are not keeping careful mental notes of everyone's movements. So an investigative gap like this, while deeply frustrating, is not entirely surprising when you understand the environment it happened in. But what investigators are working on, according to Alex, is running down every person who was on that island, scheduling interviews, pinning people to their stories, and trying to collapse that window from both ends, getting it as tight and as precise as the evidence will allow. Now let me circle back to that independent witness, the woman named Caitlin Bouchard, who took the photograph of the boats and reported that when her group left the island at 7:30 in the evening, Nolan was nowhere in sight. This matters enormously. Think about what that does to the working timeline. If Nolan was not visible anywhere on that island or near those vessels at 7:30 in the evening, and his friends had already departed by around 4:30, then you are looking at a window of roughly 3 hours during which whatever happened to Nolan Wells actually happened. No one from his immediate group around. Hundreds of strangers on the beach and water. A young man, just 18 years old, alone on a barrier island 10 miles off the coast of Mississippi. Alex walked through exactly how that kind of witness account factors into an investigation like this. He described it as the process of narrowing the window from both ends. You have a last confirmed sighting somewhere in the afternoon. You now have this observation at 7:30 that Nolan was not visible. So investigators work to collapse the space between those 2 points, looking for anything at all, any photograph, any statement, any piece of electronic data that can help pin down a more specific and reliable window. And the tighter you can get that window, the closer you get to understanding what series of events could have led to what we know happened. Alex also raised the scenario of accidental drowning, and he was very careful to be clear that he was not claiming that is what happened. But he explained something that genuinely reframes how a lot of people are thinking about this case. He said that drowning as a cause of death is profoundly misunderstood by the general public. On television and in movies, drowning is always this dramatic, loud, visible event. People screaming, people clearly struggling on the surface. In reality, that is frequently not how it happens at all. Drowning victims often slip beneath the surface silently. A person can go under with almost no visible commotion whatsoever, especially if they are tired, disoriented, or impaired in any way. Someone standing 50 feet away might see nothing out of the ordinary. Alex also raised a point that genuinely surprised me when I heard it, even though in hindsight maybe it should not have. He noted that the 18 to 24 age group is actually one of the most statistically at-risk categories for drowning deaths in the United States. And the reason is not what most people expect. Young people at that age, healthy, athletic, physically capable, tend to feel invincible. They look at a stretch of water and think, that is not that far, I can make it. And sometimes they cannot. Even strong swimmers can drown. Physical fitness and athletic ability do not make you immune to fatigue, to panic, to disorientation, to currents, or to any of the other factors that can overwhelm a person in the water when things go wrong. Now, all of that said, there is still a fundamental question hanging over this entire case that has not been publicly answered, and that is the toxicology and autopsy report. The official state autopsy has been completed, but the results are sealed. They will not be released to the public until the case goes before a grand jury. District Attorney Angel Myers McCareth has explained that under Mississippi law, any death in the county that is not clearly from natural causes or a straightforward non-criminal accident is presented to a grand jury. So that report, the one that could answer so many of the most important questions about cause of death and Nolan's physical condition at the time he disappeared, is locked away until that process plays out. And right now, we do not have any timeline for when that is going to happen. And this connects directly to something Nolan's mother, Christine Winsley, has been pushing back on publicly. She appeared on Don Lemon's show and challenged one of the narratives that has been circulating consistently in media coverage, specifically the narrative around how heavily Nolan had been drinking that day. She said that one of Nolan's football coaches saw him on the island between 2:45 and 3:30 in the afternoon, and that the coach described Nolan as perfectly fine, not sloppy drunk, not heavily intoxicated. And Christine Winsley is asking out loud why the opposite narrative has been pushed so persistently across multiple media reports. There is real tension here, because an internal email from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources describes Nolan's alcohol intake as heavy before he was reported missing. So you have a direct conflict. You have an internal MDMR characterization saying heavy drinking, and you have a first-hand account from a football coach who saw Nolan during that same general time period and described him as perfectly fine. Without the toxicology report being public, that conflict sits unresolved. And it matters because how impaired Nolan was, or was not, is directly relevant to understanding what might have happened to him. Now let's get into the 5 specific unresolved issues that the United Cajun Navy report identifies, because this is really the substance of what they are telling us, and every one of these points is worth understanding clearly. First, investigators need to authenticate the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan. That means pinning down the exact time, the exact location, the original source of the evidence, and the format of the media it came from. Not an approximation, not someone's recollection. An authenticated, verified, documented data point. Second, they need to authenticate the 323 and 427 media. And this gets technical, but it is genuinely important. Photographs and videos carry metadata, which are timestamps embedded in the file itself. But those timestamps are not always what they appear to be. You have to determine whether a timestamp reflects when the photo was actually taken, when it was posted somewhere online, or when someone screen recorded it from another device. Those can be completely different moments in time. Getting this right is essential to building an accurate timeline. Third, investigators need to identify the vessel labeled as Boat X in the report. When exactly did it leave the configuration of boats? Where did it go after that? Who was on board? That is not a minor side detail. That could be a genuinely critical piece of the overall picture. Fourth, the 431 departure of the Triton needs to be authenticated using primary electronic data. That means GPS records, transponder data, something that can be independently verified rather than relying solely on what people say they remember. Human memory is imperfect and malleable. Electronic records are not. And fifth, investigators need to create a complete occupant by occupant roster of every vessel involved that day, and then compare each person's statement against whatever visual evidence exists, photo by photo, statement by statement. Does what people say actually match what the cameras captured? Are there discrepancies? And if there are, what do those discrepancies tell us? The United Cajun Navy report concludes with a statement that I think is really important, and I want to make sure you hear it clearly, because it speaks directly to the entire conversation happening across social media right now. They say that until those 5 points are resolved, any narrative claiming certainty about what Nolan was doing, where he was, and how he moved, quote, exceeds what the supplied evidence can support. That is a measured, careful, honest assessment from people who spent real time investigating this independently. And I think all of us following this case need to sit with that statement. Alex agreed with the substance of those 5 points when he addressed them, but he also made a point that is worth emphasizing here. He said he would be surprised if law enforcement was not already working on all 5 of those things simultaneously. He mentioned that investigators are very likely pulling GPS data directly from the vessels, cross-referencing electronic records with witness accounts, and actively looking for discrepancies between what people claim happened and what the available data actually shows. But he also raised something that tends to get overlooked in the online conversation around this case. He pointed out that on an island hosting hundreds of people during a 4th of July celebration, not everyone who was there that day has come forward to investigators. And not necessarily because they have something to hide. In cases where there is this level of public attention, this level of threatening behavior and anger circulating online, a percentage of people who were there are simply going to make the decision that they do not want to be involved. Not because they saw something they are hiding, not because they are guilty of anything, simply because they do not want death threats in their inbox, and they do not want their names attached to a case this heated. That is a completely understandable human response, even if it means that some potentially relevant piece of information is sitting with someone who is choosing to stay quiet. And speaking of threats, this is something that has escalated to a genuinely alarming degree around this case, and it needs to be addressed directly. Some of the people who were with Nolan that day, specifically Warren Hudson, whose father put up a $50,000 reward for information, along with Jax Patalo and Morgan Seymour, they have launched a fundraiser on GiveSendGo with a goal of $100,000 to cover legal defense costs. In the description of that fundraiser, they say they have been, and I am quoting directly, inundated with death threats, threats of violence, and defamation. They say they have been falsely and wrongly blamed online and in the media for having either directly or indirectly played a role in Nolan's death. The situation reportedly became so severe that most of them could not even attend their own best friend's funeral without fear for their safety. An attorney for the Hudson family confirmed to Rolling Stone that the fundraiser is legitimate, and that the funds would be used to pursue potential defamation claims against what he described as an online mob. And the criminal charges that have come out of the threat landscape around this case are deeply troubling. The Sun-Herald reported that an Illinois man named Edward James Porter has now been criminally charged with threatening to kill witnesses and their families in connection with the ongoing state investigation into Nolan's death. He allegedly told one witness he was going to come kill them and sent them their home address. He allegedly told another witness he would kill them, cut up the body, and stuff the remains into a suitcase. And this comes after 2 previous arrests that have already been reported, one in Ohio and one in California, both allegedly connected to threats made in relation to this same case. This is what happens when a case generates this level of public emotional intensity. People who are grieving, people who are angry, people who have convinced themselves they already know what happened even though they were not there, and have access to only a fraction of the actual evidence, they direct that energy outward. And the targets are real people with real addresses and real families. Whatever happened on that island, the threats are real, the danger is real, and it is actively making a complicated investigation even more difficult to conduct. So where does all of this leave us right now? We are sitting in a strange and uncertain place on the timeline. We do not know how far along the sheriff's investigation actually is. We do not know when this is going to be presented to a grand jury. We do not know when the autopsy and toxicology results will become public information. What we do know is that the United Cajun Navy has given us the most detailed independent documentation we have had yet of the events of that day. What we know is that there is a critical window of time that still has not been fully and publicly accounted for. What we know is that the boat movements, the witness statements, the distress call, and the photographs all require the kind of rigorous authentication that law enforcement has both the tools and the absolute obligation to conduct. Alex put it in a way that I thought was honest and fair and worth repeating. He said that whatever the final findings turn out to be, what matters is that this family is able to feel confident in the investigation that took place. If the evidence points to foul play, those responsible need to be held accountable. If the evidence points to an accident, the family needs to be able to trust that law enforcement did their job thoroughly, honestly, and without cutting corners. And those are two very different outcomes to navigate for a grieving family, because no finding is going to be easy. No answer is going to make the loss of their son anything other than devastating. He also said something that deserves to be the final word in any conversation about this case. There is a family that is grieving the loss of their child. Whatever happened on that island, a young man is gone. By every account, Nolan Wells was a wonderful person. He was active in his school, he was close with his friends, he was loved deeply by his family, and he deserves to be remembered for that. Not to have his name become a vehicle for online rage and viral speculation. This case is not going away. The investigation is still moving forward. The grand jury process is still coming, and we are going to be here every single step of the way, bringing you every update as it happens, breaking it all down as clearly as we can. If you have watched this whole way through, thank you. This case takes real time and attention to understand properly, and I genuinely appreciate you being here for it. Please leave a like on this video if you found it useful, because it helps this channel reach more people who care about getting the full picture on stories like this one. Subscribe if you have not already, so you get notified the moment we drop the next update. And please, drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. And let me know what you think the most important unanswered question in this case is right now, because I want to know what you are thinking and what you want us to dig into next. We will see you in the next one.